They laughed at her during the wedding until the mysterious CEO put a ring on her finger. The humiliation, Alina Rosewood adjusted the simple blue dress she had borrowed from her closet, knowing it would never compete with the designer gowns surrounding her at Grandview Manor. The opulent wedding venue sparkled with crystal chandeliers and gold-trimmed decorations, every detail screaming of the wealth that the Ashford family possessed in abundance. She took a deep breath and stepped into the reception hall, hoping to blend into the background of her sister Victoria's wedding celebration. The moment she entered, whispers began to follow her like shadows. Elena had always been the forgotten sister, the one who worked double shifts at the local diner while Victoria married into high society. Their parents had made it clear from childhood which daughter was destined for greatness and which was meant to serve in the background. "Look who decided to show up," came a sharp voice behind her. Elena turned to see Priscilla Worthington, Victoria's maid of honor, approaching with a group of perfectly dressed bridesmaids. Their eyes held the same cruel amusement that Elena had grown accustomed to over the years. "I almost didn't recognize you without your apron," Priscilla continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. The other women giggled like schoolgirls, though they were all well into their 20s. Elena felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but forced herself to maintain composure. "I'm here for Victoria's special day," Elena replied quietly, trying to move past the group. But Priscilla stepped directly into her path, clearly not finished with her entertainment. "Of course you are, dear, though I'm surprised they let you in through the front door. Shouldn't you be in the kitchen with the other help?" The laughter that followed was sharp and cutting, designed to wound. Elena's hands trembled slightly, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. From across the room, Victoria appeared in her $1,000 wedding gown, looking every bit the perfect bride. When she spotted Elena, her expression shifted to one of annoyance rather than joy at seeing her sister. "Elena, what are you doing here so early?" Victoria asked, approaching with her new husband, Richard Ashford III, a man who had never worked a day in his life but inherited more money than most people could spend in 10 lifetimes. "The ceremony was beautiful, Victoria." "I wanted to congratulate you," Elena said softly, hoping for even a moment of sisterly warmth. Richard looked Elena up and down with obvious distaste. "Victoria, I thought we discussed this. The reception is for our social circle. Perhaps your sister would be more comfortable helping the catering staff." Elena's heart sank, but she wasn't entirely surprised. This was how it had always been. She was good enough to clean up after family gatherings, but never good enough to actually participate as family. "Richard's right," Victoria said without even looking at Elena. "You know how these events work. It's important for us to maintain a certain atmosphere." The rejection stung more than Elena expected. She had hoped that on her wedding day, Victoria might remember they were sisters, might show even a trace of the bond they had shared as children before money and status became more important than family. "I understand," Elena whispered, turning to leave. But as she moved toward the exit, she heard Victoria's voice rise behind her. "Everyone, please excuse my sister. She's not really part of our world, as you can see." The comment was followed by a wave of laughter from the assembled guests. Elena's steps faltered, and she felt tears threatening to spill over. She found herself trapped near the grand staircase as more guests began to notice the spectacle. Someone had clearly spread word that entertainment was available in the form of mocking the poor sister. A circle began to form around Elena, trapping her in a nightmare of public humiliation. "Is this really Victoria's sister?" asked an elderly woman dripping in diamonds. "How embarrassing for the family." "I heard she works at some greasy diner downtown," added another voice. "Can you imagine the scandal if the wrong people found out?" Elena looked desperately toward Victoria, hoping her sister would intervene, would remember their childhood promises to always protect each other. But Victoria was busy accepting congratulations from other guests, pointedly ignoring the cruel theater playing out just yards away. The circle of tormentors grew larger, their comments becoming more vicious with each passing moment. Elena felt suffocated, trapped like an animal surrounded by predators. Her chest tightened, and she struggled to breathe normally as panic began to set in. "Please," she whispered, though no one seemed to hear or care. The laughter grew louder, more pointed, more deliberately cruel. Someone pulled out their phone to record the humiliation, and Elena realized this moment would follow her far beyond tonight. "Look how she's dressed," Priscilla announced to the crowd. "Did she get that outfit from a thrift store?" "Oh wait, She probably can't even afford thrift stores. Elena's vision began to blur with unshed tears. She had endured years of this treatment, but never so publicly, never with such an audience of people who seemed to take genuine pleasure in her pain. She looked around desperately for an exit, any way to escape before she completely broke down in front of everyone. The worst part wasn't the cruelty itself, but the way Victoria continued to ignore it all. Her own sister, the person who should have defended her, was instead allowing this humiliation to continue unchecked. Elena realized in that moment that she truly was alone in the world. "I think she's about to cry," someone called out gleefully. "This is better than the wedding ceremony itself." Elena's knees felt weak, and she gripped the marble banister of the staircase to steady herself. The faces around her blurred together into a sea of contempt and amusement. She had never felt smaller, more worthless, more completely abandoned by everyone who should have cared about her. Just as she thought she might collapse under the weight of their cruelty, the massive front doors of the manor swung open with dramatic force. The sound echoed through the reception hall like thunder, causing every head to turn toward the entrance. Elena looked up through her tears, wondering what could possibly make this nightmare any worse. That's when she saw him. A man stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall and commanding in a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than Elena made in a year. Even from across the room, his presence seemed to change the very atmosphere of the space. Conversations died mid-sentence, and the cruel laughter faded into confused silence. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to owning every room he entered. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw strong and determined. But it was his eyes that caught Elena's attention, dark and intense, scanning the crowd until they locked onto hers with startling directness. The mysterious stranger began walking through the crowd, and people automatically stepped aside to let him pass. There was something almost magnetic about the way he moved, purposeful and unwavering. Elena wiped her tears quickly, unsure why this stranger's presence felt so significant. "Who is that?" whispered someone in the crowd, but no one seemed to know. Even Richard and Victoria looked confused, though they tried to maintain their composure as proper hosts. The man continued his steady approach, never breaking eye contact with Elena. The circle of tormentors began to shift nervously, sensing that their entertainment was about to be interrupted by someone far more important than they had expected. Elena's heart pounded as the stranger drew closer. She had no idea who he was or why he was here, but something in his gaze told her that her nightmare was about to transform into something entirely different. The cruel laughter had died completely now, replaced by curious whispers and nervous energy. Whatever was about to happen, Elena knew her life was about to change forever. The unexpected hero. James Blackwell had arrived at Grandview Manor with the intention of making a brief appearance at the Ashford wedding before heading to his next business engagement. As the founder and CEO of Blackwell Enterprises, one of the most powerful investment firms in the country, he rarely had time for social events. But Richard Ashford's father had been a long-time business associate, and certain appearances were necessary for maintaining important relationships. What he hadn't expected was to witness such a display of cruelty the moment he walked through the doors. James had built his fortune by reading people and situations quickly, and what he saw in that circle of well-dressed vultures made his blood boil. A young woman stood trapped in the center, tears threatening to spill from her eyes while a crowd of privileged socialites took turns humiliating her for their entertainment. But it wasn't just the cruelty that caught his attention. It was the way the woman held herself despite the abuse, the quiet dignity she maintained even as her world crumbled around her. There was something in her posture that spoke of strength, of someone who had endured far too much but refused to break completely. As James approached, he could hear fragments of the cruel comments being thrown at the woman. The casual way these people destroyed another human being for sport disgusted him more than any business betrayal he had ever experienced. He had grown up poor, had fought his way to success through determination and intelligence, and he recognized the look of someone being punished simply for not having been born into privilege. "Excuse me," James said in a voice that carried absolute authority. The crowd immediately turned toward him, and he could see recognition dawning on several faces. In their social circles, everyone knew who James Blackwell was, even if they had never met him personally. "Mr. Blackwell," Richard stammered, clearly surprised by the unexpected appearance of someone so far above his own social status. "We weren't expecting you." "What an honor." James ignored Richard completely, his attention focused entirely on the woman in the center of the circle. Up close, he could see that she was beautiful in a way that didn't require expensive clothes or professional styling. Her beauty was natural, genuine, the kind that came from within rather than from a makeup artist's skill. "I apologize for my late arrival," James said, his voice carrying across the now silent reception hall. "I was detained by urgent business matters." Elena looked up at him in confusion, unsure why this obviously important stranger was addressing her. She had never seen him before in her life, but something in his eyes suggested he understood exactly what had been happening to her. "Elena," James said, speaking her name as if he had known her for years rather than having just learned it from the cruel gossip he had overheard. "I'm so sorry I kept you waiting." The crowd exchanged bewildered glances. How did James Blackwell, one of the most powerful men in the city, know Elena Rosewood? And why was he speaking to her with such familiarity and warmth? James extended his hand to Elena, and after a moment of hesitation, she took it. His touch was warm and steady, grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. He guided her out of the circle of tormentors with the same authority he used to run board meetings. "Ladies and gentlemen," James announced, his voice commanding the attention of every person in the room, "I believe there has been a misunderstanding here tonight." Victoria stepped forward, clearly trying to regain control of her own wedding reception. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm not sure what Elena has told you, but she's just my sister. She works at a local restaurant. There's been no misunderstanding." James turned to look at Victoria with an expression that could freeze water. "The misunderstanding, Mrs. Ashford, is thinking that someone's worth is determined by their job or their bank account rather than their character." The rebuke was delivered so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that it took a moment for the full impact to register. Several guests gasped audibly, and Victoria's face flushed with embarrassment. "Elena," James continued, turning back to her with a gentle smile that transformed his entire face. "You mentioned you've been thinking about my proposal." Elena stared at him in shock. She had no idea what game he was playing, but something in his eyes told her to trust him, to go along with whatever was happening. "Ah, yes," she managed to whisper. James smiled wider, and Elena felt her heart skip a beat. Even knowing this was some kind of performance, she couldn't deny the way his presence affected her. There was something magnetic about him, something that made her feel safer than she had in years. "I know this isn't how we planned to do this," James said, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. "But I can't wait any longer." To Elena's complete shock, James dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the reception hall. The collective gasp from the crowd was audible, and several people actually stepped backward, as if they couldn't believe what they were witnessing. James reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Elena's hands flew to her mouth in genuine surprise. Even knowing this had to be some kind of act, the sight of this powerful, handsome man kneeling before her made her heart race. "Elena Rosewood," James said, his voice strong and clear, carrying to every corner of the silent room. "You are the most genuine, caring, and beautiful woman I have ever met. You see the world with kindness instead of judgment, and you make everyone around you better just by being yourself." Elena felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time tonight, they weren't tears of humiliation. She looked down at this incredible man who had appeared like something out of a fairy tale to rescue her from her worst nightmare. "Will you marry me?" James asked, opening the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring that caught the light from the crystal chandeliers and threw rainbows across the walls. Elena looked around at the faces surrounding them. The same people who had been laughing at her moments ago now stared in absolute shock. Victoria looked like she might faint, while Richard seemed to be calculating how much money James Blackwell was worth and what this might mean for his own business prospects. "Yes," Elena whispered, then louder. "Yes, I will marry you." The cheer that went up from the crowd was immediate and thunderous. Everyone wanted to be part of this moment now, to claim they had witnessed something magical. The same people who had been mocking Elena minutes before now applauded enthusiastically, their attitudes shifting with mercenary speed. James slipped the ring onto Elena's finger with gentle care, then stood and pulled her into his arms. The kiss he gave her was soft and brief, but it sent electricity through her entire body. When they separated, Elena looked up into his dark eyes and saw something that made her breath catch. Whatever game this had started as, there was something real in the way he was looking at her now. "I love you," James whispered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I love you too," Elena replied, surprising herself by how easily the words came. She didn't understand what was happening or why this stranger had chosen to rescue her, but she knew her life had just changed forever. The reception that had begun as her humiliation transformed into her triumph. Suddenly, everyone wanted to talk to her, to congratulate her, to claim friendship with the future Mrs. Blackwell. Elena watched the transformation with a mixture of amusement and disgust. These were the same people who had been laughing at her expense just minutes ago. But through it all, James never left her side. His hand remained on her back, steady and reassuring, anchoring her to something real in the midst of all the false congratulations and sudden friendships. As the evening continued, Elena began to realize that whatever James Blackwell's original motivations, something genuine was growing between them. The way he listened to her, the careful way he made sure she was comfortable, the protective way he positioned himself between her and anyone who might cause her pain, all of it felt wonderfully, impossibly real. When the evening finally ended and James walked her to a waiting limousine, Elena knew her old life was over. Whatever came next would be different, better, more than she had ever dared to dream possible. "Thank you," she whispered as they sat in the back of the luxury car. James took her hand gently, running his thumb over the engagement ring he had placed there. "Thank you for saying yes," he replied, "even though you had every reason to run away." Elena looked out at the city lights passing by the window and smiled. For the first time in her life, she was excited about tomorrow. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them beside a man who had seen her at her most vulnerable moment and chosen to protect her instead of exploit her. She was no longer Elena Rosewood, the forgotten sister, the poor waitress, the target of cruel jokes. She was Elena Blackwell-to-be, engaged to one of the most powerful men in the city, and her future stretched ahead bright with possibilities she had never imagined. The wedding that had started as her humiliation had become the beginning of her happily ever after. If this story touched your heart even just a little, if you believe that kindness can heal and that love can grow from the most unexpected places, then don't forget to hit that hype button and subscribe to Everyverse Stories for more powerful tales that remind us what truly matters. We share real emotional and inspiring stories that speak to the soul. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that move the world. Subscribe, hit, and stay with us for stories that heal. This is Everyverse Stories. See you in the next one.